For those of you who have not been here before, Zach Billings, co-founder and CEO of Wikimotive. And for those of you not familiar with Wikimotive, we are a boutique marketing agency with a specialization in search. And we've been in business for 16 years covering the topic of search, which always makes it interesting anytime there are new developments to go over. Welcome to the State of AI Search. This is our fourth installment now in this series. It's a monthly series, and we are bringing you up to speed as the ecosystem evolves, specifically as it regards AI, both in terms of AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, etc., and also the use of AI content and AI force multipliers for the purpose of marketing in automotive. And so when we think about all of these topics, when we go through everything that I have to show you here, keep in mind that the goal for you as dealers, for marketers, for vendors, is ultimately to connect consumers who are low funnel, shopping, looking to transact and soon with dealerships and their inventory, right? So we're not talking about just kind of nebulous research terminology. We're talking about how do we get people to dealership websites? How do we get people to directions? How do we get them to recommendations and citations? And so keep that in mind as we go through this. If you want a little look down memory lane at where we've been, first month was looking at just the state of the numbers in the industry, and we have some updates on that. That was data, large volume data through February of 2026. We're going to bring that up to date. And then month two, we looked at the study that we're doing, covering a huge number of data points, looking at which levers, which knobs impact the realities in ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, specifically ChatGPT, which is the market share leader for consumers. And that study is teaching us which things truly do move the needle and which things are just echo chamber buzz topics that are being talked about again and again in 20 groups by vendors in the dealer community, and maybe with not all the truth that we all assume. And then last month, we focused on a range of myths and their realities and action items that you can be taking at the dealership level with your vendors or internally to be able to move the needle more in the AI search landscape. So go ahead and look at those. They're all still current, with the exception to some degree of the very first episode, because we're going to bring you up to speed with some newer data during this episode. So without further ado, we'll jump in. Feel free, if anybody has questions that you want to ask, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on that. The team did load me up some questions that have been asked since the last episode. We'll cover some of those at the end and give everybody an opportunity if you'd like. So let's jump in. We are doing a study, okay? And after I bring you up to speed on the latest information in ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and how users are getting to dealership websites, what the data says, we're going to go over the latest information in our ongoing study. So quickly, a recap. The study status in May was we were collecting large volumes of data, and we talked about that during the June episode. So what it is there are a range of prompts. Could be best Chevy dealer near Houston. Could be Silverados for sale under 50,000. Inventory discovery searches, brand discovery searches, dealer discovery searches are the three categories. And so we're tracking these prompts, and we're tracking dozens and dozens and dozens of data points on the top cited dealers for each one of those prompts. And so in total, what's happening is we are collecting over 5,000 data points per month per dealer in our study. And that huge volume of data allows us to look at what are the common predictors of success in LLMs in this space. And so when we look at that, we can see it was a 90% predictor that content was going to be the influencing factor, 75% that it was inventory. And I'm going to update you on some of that with a dealer in a completely different environment very soon. So May, we collected or finished collecting large volumes of data. June, we analyzed that data, crunched the numbers, hypothesized, here are the levers and knobs that we see. And I exposed that in June's episode for everybody to be able to digest. Now, that was specific to more metro high population dealers. And so we've advanced that to diversify. We tested the hypothesis in July with a change to the cohort of dealers in the study. And now we have some new things to analyze in terms of variables between the first and the last. So before we get to that information, let's bring everybody up to speed on the state of the market, the state of AI search. So we are conducting an ongoing study of this as well, and we're collecting data across a rolling 24-month period. So every time we collect an update on this, it's the lagging 24 months, and we're increasing the dealer count as we get access to more and more and more Google Analytics data across dealers. So now we're up to 253 dealers in the study across 24 months of data. That is almost 38 million sessions just from organic search and AI search. Never mind paid, never mind all the other referral sources and direct and so on. Just from organic and AI search, 38 million sessions analyzed. A lot of data in there, a lot of conclusions to be drawn from there. So this is the latest data. The first thing I wanted to show everybody, because I get a lot of questions about, I talk about ChatGPT as my example a lot, and we use it a lot in our study material. It's the focus point. So when I say ChatGPT, sometimes people will say, well, hold on, what about Gemini? What about Claude? Aren't they, the ones with more market share now? And different people think different things based on what they use in many cases. So if you're a Gemini user, your perception may be that Gemini has kind of risen in market share and has eclipsed ChatGPT. If you're a Claude user, you might believe that that's superior. And there's pros and cons to each of the platforms depending on your use case. There's also different demographics, different user types that are common. Claude is more common with professionals and people who are analytical in what they're using it for. ChatGPT, more casual use. Gemini, somewhere in the middle. And we'll get to the market share of users for each of them. But this data here, what you're looking at, is session data across that 253 dealers, okay? So what you can see is Gemini, that's the purple line, is breaking out. Gemini has risen above the pack, but ChatGPT is not on this graph, I want to point out. Claude is still down at the bottom. A lot of people are using Claude for research, deep research, and for analysis of things. Not a lot of consumers using it to do searches like find me the best Ford dealers in my area or find me F-150s with the best offers. Okay, so yes, Claude has increased, Gemini has increased more, but when we put them in more context with ChatGPT, it starts to paint a slightly different picture, right? So the blue line is ChatGPT sessions to the 253 dealers in this study, in this cohort, okay? And you can still see the other lines are down at the bottom. Gemini is the line that you can slightly see poking out above the top. And across all these 253 dealers, Gemini represents just 3% of the sessions that are coming to dealer websites. Claude, less than 1%. And ChatGPT, 95% of the AI sessions that are coming to dealership websites. So while the realities are, if you look at the little numbers in white here, 50%, give or take, of consumers are using ChatGPT, yet 95% of traffic to dealership websites is coming from ChatGPT. Interesting how that doesn't line up, and it's because you have different types of people using different LLMs in different ways. And ChatGPT, from a low funnel consumer standpoint, is the most popular one in use, and therefore should be the one that is most top of mind right now. That having been said, Gemini and Claude have been gaining market share in terms of general consumer use, and it'll be interesting to see how this develops in the near future. Something else interesting to note is the shape of that blue line, the ChatGPT line. Okay, so what you can see is it obviously came off the ground, so to speak, back in late 2024. That's simply when OpenAI, ChatGPT's parent company, launched the ability for there to be links to outside websites. And then that same feature was accelerated and rolled out to all users in the March-April timeframe. That's where this kind of hockey stick upward happened. So these are changes to the ecosystem as much as they are changes to user base. And user growth is relatively linear across AI at this point. Most of the early adopters had already flooded in well over a year ago at this point. And so what you have is just the slow trickle of additional adoption. And that's normal for emerging technologies. There's not an exponential growth in user base happening here. Mark my words. That's far, far, far from the truth. And so the user growth is just going to be steady. And the big inflection points in this graph are really changes to the ChatGPT ecosystem and the way that they display links that people can click out to. Also, the different ways that they're evaluating what's authoritative and what's not. Third parties, for instance, were given more weight around this top of the hump. And the reason that that tapered downward is ChatGPT started showing more third parties as results and fewer dealer resources. Not to say that dealers don't show up, just that it changed in its proportion. Then in March of this year, we had a recovery to trend. But what I want to point out here is that we just kind of got back on trend line, right? If we look at this, there's points where it's been low, there's points where it's been high, low again, high again. But we're following a roughly linear trend line. And that is normal and expected at this point because that's what's increasing in terms of the user base. It's not going exponential, okay? So with that in mind, right, we can see that in March of 2026, the increase happened, right? So just going back to this, the increase, why is it climbing now? The answer is GPT 5.3 launched and the changes therein, more web search. Okay, first and foremost, which is interesting because web search is very much tied to content, to authority, to even things as simple as visibility in Google if it's doing web searching. Okay, so it's aligning results that might show up in an LLM, in ChatGPT specifically here, closer and closer to what would be driving visibility in traditional SEO. Okay, the next thing is that the number of sources that can be exposed in a given chat that you might be having in a given prompt did increase. So now there's more opportunities to create a click through. And then ultimately, what this is leading to is just there are more ways that a consumer can potentially find a dealership resource, click through, and it's OpenAI just continuing to iterate that forward so that it's more user friendly. Doesn't mean that it's completely user friendly, right? It means that they're increasing the ability for people to click through. And consumers still can struggle at times to find that specific thing that they're looking for. And everyone watching this, if you're watching an AI search update, I have no doubt that you are an LLM user, an AI user, might be Gemini, might be Claude, might be ChatGPT. You're certainly using one. And your own experiences, especially outside of the automotive marketing lens, will reinforce what I'm telling you here, which is that you've tried to find something which you just really struggled to get it to give you a good answer to. It, no matter how many times it thought about it a different way, you introduced a different catalyst in your prompt, it just can have a hard time with that sometimes. And it depends on the topic a lot. Research topics, it's usually great, but the lower in the funnel you get, the more you're trying to say, give me a specific recommendation. Find me that specific product. The more it gives you kind of weird, slightly off base things, and it's a frustrating experience when you go through that. We forget this when we're trying to think about our own marketing. What ends up happening is we assume, well, okay, all consumers are clearly going to try to find a car using ChatGPT, and I just need to make sure I show up there. And what we forget is that their experience trying to find a car with ChatGPT is no better than our experience trying to find what polo you want to buy at Nordstrom or which e-bike to buy or whatever it is that you might be trying to work out using ChatGPT's help. It's just as frustrating. And that crafts user experience, which changes much more slowly and needs to shift large volume habits. And that's where the rest of the data comes into play here. So this, again, is the LLMs. You've got all of the others. You've got ChatGPT in blue. And if you only looked at this graph, you would say ChatGPT is the game in town. That's where I need to spend my effort. But what happens when you add more data to the same set? What happens when you zoom out and think about the larger ecosystem? Remember, our goal as marketers is outcomes. It's to drive transactional opportunities for our dealerships. It's to get leads. It's to get people to our website, not for research, but to submit a lead. It's to get people to be exposed to dealerships, maybe in a ChatGPT prompt, but with clear, hey, that's the one that you should go to if you want the best deal, the best experience, etc. So how is this influencing, how much is AI influencing that pattern in search marketing? Well, here's the AI line. Now we've merged all of them together. So ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all part of that blue line now. And the orange line is Bing organic search. Okay. Now we're going to add Google. And for those of you who have seen this before, this won't be a surprise, but it continues to look the same, which is the interesting part. So in this context, across 253 dealers, 38 million sessions represented on your screen right here. At the end point, the most recent point, not the whole time, the most recent month where the AI traffic is at its highest, AI represents less than 1% of the sessions to these dealers' websites compared to just organic search. And Bing represents 7% and Google represents 92%. Nothing radical has changed here. And what we need to remember is that, yes, the blue line will continue to increase slowly, steadily, linearly. But even if it was going to increase exponentially, it still would be years away from reaching the orange line and years away from reaching the green line. So we need to use these data points, this macro picture, this zoomed out picture, to calibrate our expectations for the return, bottom line return outcomes that we can derive from AI search. I'm not saying ignore AI search, but I'm saying calibrate. And the best part is about all of this, most of the fundamentals that serve the green line and the orange line are the same fundamentals that are turning out to serve the blue line, as is being shown in the study that we're performing. So if you want to show up better for the AI traffic that is currently in its infancy but is steadily climbing over time, the answer is do more of the things that serve the orange and the green line, the traditional fundamentals that underpin SEO. Okay. So let's look at a little bit more of the information here that supports this, and then we'll get into the study on levers and knobs that impact this. So just a reminder of the stats, consumer-wide, roughly 50% of consumers using LLMs, this is specifically US adult users, roughly 50% are using ChatGPT, roughly 30% are using Gemini, 10% for Claude, 10% for everything else. However, in click-throughs that are low funnel click-throughs in automotive, 95% ChatGPT and a very small amount Gemini, tiny amount Claude, and tiny amount everything else. Very interesting in terms of how that separates. Okay, so if there's a lesson here, if there's a takeaway that you want, it's don't just pay attention to the market share that the LLM is capturing in terms of the overall AI ecosystem. You have to look a little closer at the specific data and find out in your industry, which for everyone watching, I'm assuming is automotive, what are the consumers actually using? Okay. And then by the numbers, AI represents 0.6% of organic search traffic to dealership websites. And back in October of 2025, it was 0.5%. This hasn't changed a whole lot. And what about conversions is the other question that should be asked, right? Because conversion rate is a little higher on LLM traffic. Those people have already done a lot of research for sure. And so when you get an entrance into your website from ChatGPT, from Gemini, from Claude, those people are higher propensity to convert on your website. They're definitely lower in the funnel by the time they make it. So what about conversions? Same data produced 0.6% in October, 0.9% in June. So we're almost at 1% of organic conversions coming from AI, but it's a linear slope. It's going to take a long time before you should be weighting AI individually higher than even Bing, which is currently at 7%. Okay. So with all of that said, let's take a look at the update on the study. Now, remember, we're collecting about 5,000 data points per month per dealer in the study. And we started with controls being in metro areas, a lot of dealer density, a lot of inventory volume among those dealers, which is an interesting component of all of this. And what we've done is we've expanded the study to similar dealers. So, like, we're trying to compare Chevy to Chevy and things like that to remove variables. To the greatest degree that we can with the volume in play, we are trying to use the scientific method for this study. Lots of people say lots of things about things they heard in their echo chamber or something that AI repeated from a study that it saw. And it all came from basically a telephone game of wrong conclusions in many cases, not all cases, but many cases. What we're trying to do is remove that noise and not inject our own bias into these studies. We're trying to simply look at what does the data say does or does not work in large enough volumes that we can draw clear conclusions and keep our foot on the gas on this study to make sure that every handful of months we have fresh conclusions and that we're increasing the size of the data and that we're not drawing circumstantial conclusions. So a good example of a circumstantial conclusion would be to say, okay, most of the Chevy dealers in the Houston market that show up have dealer inspire websites or dealer on websites. Well, most of the Chevy dealers in the Houston market have dealer inspire or dealer on websites. So that would be a confirmation bias, right? You also have to look at the underlying nuances. What are the commonalities among your cohort that's being evaluated? And you have to look at that carefully to be able to understand what is a false flag, what is a false positive, what is a false negative, and control for those variables. So that's what we're doing. Started with urban, now we're moving to rural. Rural has less density of dealers, right? And rural doesn't have to mean like the middle of the woods. What that means is a smaller metro area. In this particular case, one of the dealers that we started with for the rural side of the study is in a city of 45,000 people. Small by metro standards, but not lacking in population. And there are multiple satellite metros around them that are also small, 30, 45, 50,000 people, that kind of size. So when I say rural, I mean, there's some open space. You'd find a cow somewhere, within 15 minutes of the dealership. And what I'm not saying is the middle of Montana. Okay. This applies to a lot of dealerships. We had a lot of urban dealerships, a lot of semi-rural dealerships out there. And the differences are not insubstantial, as we're finding. So first, what's the same? The things that are the same is, first of all, reviews are extremely important. When the search in question is something like best Chevy dealer near wherever, reviews are going to be a dominant factor. Okay. They are going to have an enormous impact on who shows up. If you have good reviews, you show up well. If you don't, you don't. And your about page that says we're the best, we're number one, and we've been in business for forever does not have much bearing on this. It's reviews. You can't game that. You have to handle that at the showroom level. You have to look for, and the trick that I suggested in the last episode was you have to go search for your own store and you have to ask an LLM, what don't people like about working with ABC Chevrolet? And let it say, here's the consensus, here's the common thread, here's the thing that comes up again and again and again, and then take those things and go to your team and work it from a process standpoint, right? If the common complaint is bait and switch, you need to work on some training around what's promised and what you do at the showroom to still be able to hopefully get butts in seats, because we need that, but without a perception of a bait and switch, because that's coming up a lot. And that will pay dividends into the future, especially in AI search, okay? We found that brand is still relevant for brand search. Shocker. So if you say, if your store is called ABC Motors and someone says, tell me about ABC Motors, you're going to show up. It's that simple. And that's not a surprising congruency across this. And then trusted sources continue to matter. And trusted sources means not you, the dealer, unfortunately. Hopefully what will turn out in time is that more and more quality content can buck that trend. And we did observe that in our studies so far, that content is the number one predictor of dealers being able to show up prominently in AI searches. But entities like ChatGPT still have a method for identifying sites that just get more weight than a local dealership does. Car and Driver just gets more weight than a local dealership does. General Motors gets more weight than a local Chevy dealer does. And third parties get more weight than a local Chevy dealer. More inventory, bigger footprint. That just is what it is. And this is no different than how Google assigns generalized weight to things. If you do a search for F-150 for sale right now on your browser, you will see a lot of third parties in the mix. You can also find some dealers who have produced content or have large inventory volumes, but naturally the third parties get an edge in that kind of thing because they're a national resource with a lot of inventory. It makes sense in practical terms. So the same is going to be true in any environment, and that's what our study is proving, is that you have to work disproportionately hard as a dealer to show up in some of these searches because you're not a nationally respected entity. Okay. Now, the differences in inventory discovery in a metro area, inventory and content were major influencers of being able to show up. And it wasn't schema. LLMS.txt has absolutely nothing to do with it, and Google's even confirmed that for the Google ecosystem. It's none of these tips and tricks that everyone's saying. It was first content, second inventory for inventory prompts in AI. Okay, so that was urban. Now in rural, we're finding far fewer instances of dealers showing up. The density of dealers in the area that you're performing this search is just lower. And in rural areas, usually in most environments, the average inventory size of a dealership is less. And so what ends up happening is the third parties by proportion end up looking that much more appealing, so they show up more prominently. Okay, that means in a rural area, you're going to have to work even harder still to show up for inventory searches on ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, than if you're an urban dealership. Okay, still doable. Content is still a predictor, but it's going to be harder. Brand queries. Basically, if you have a sister store, that would be the main way that this would show up in practice. And we did analyze a case of this where we picked a dealer who had a solid local footprint, good size rural dealer, roughly 200 cars a month. And they've got a sister store at a satellite location a little ways away. And what ended up happening is if we did a dealer search, like tell me about ABC Motors near their major store, that showed up. If we said, tell me about ABC Motors further away as the center point for the prompt being performed, where ChatGPT thinks you're not in the dealer's location, but a different location, it got a lot more confused and started surfacing the satellite store. So it's very easy for that to get conflated, more so in rural areas than we found in metro areas where the footprint might be bigger. And then finally, we really just are seeing more third-party visibility in AI search results. I generally do not believe in over-dependence on third parties from a strict ROI analysis standpoint with less of the assisted attribution that is often claimed. Usually one or two third parties are functional for a given dealership and the rest aren't always. And it varies by market. So there's not, individual ones that I'm calling out here. But what I will say is volume of opportunity, remember, is less than 1% in the AI space. But for that less than 1%, the third parties do have an edge. So if that market share for AI increases in the future, third parties may become a little bit more of something that you need to think about. Hey, is our visibility there necessary, worth the money to be able to show up? I don't think that should be your solution today, but it is a weighting factor. And even though it's not in line with what I would like the result to be here, that's the result. That's what the study says. So we're sharing the data. Okay. Yeah, just more of the same. We're finding a lot of those. Also, national resources, depends on what you're searching. If it's strictly transactional, you won't usually find like a car and driver or that kind of thing. But if could be informational, could be transactional, you're kind of doing research, especially comparison type things. Car and driver will definitely start to float in there. Motor Trend, things like that. National resources that are getting respect. And then the review ecosystem. So I get a lot of questions about this. And make no mistake, your reviews, the quality and quantity of your reviews across many platforms is the number one predictor, number one ranking factor for you to show up in AI search. So if you're worried about how you show up on ChatGPT, stop thinking so much about GEO, AEO, and start thinking about what's my reputation like. Okay. Number one lever that you have at your disposal. It's not a sexy one because you need to go do some hard process work to fix that, but it's the number one lever. Okay. The question that has started to come up more and more is, okay, if that's the case, which platform should I be funneling my reviews to? And there's lots of different things being said about this. OpenAI did launch a partnership with Yelp within the last month. And what that means is they are not exclusively using Yelp as the source of reviews for ChatGPT, but it's definitely going to be a bigger weighting factor, which sucks. Because unfortunately, Yelp is one of the most difficult platforms to manage your reputation on because Yelp suppresses the reviews from non-regular Yelp users. And there's not a great way to game that. So just sending more reviews to Yelp is not going to fix your problem necessarily. This is really going to get down to the core, the root of process and trying to avoid getting negative reviews in the first place. And Yelpers are disproportionately prone to leaving those. So this is an emerging space. I don't have a quick fix for you, but I am here to tell you that when it comes to somebody asking about your reputation or asking who's the best Chevy dealer near Houston or something like that, you're going to need to be on top of your Yelp reviews in ChatGPT. Google, of course, is going to default to their own ecosystem, and so is ChatGPT to a large degree. Google is the largest body of reviews for local businesses, period, full stop, and so it's absolutely going to get significant respect. So my recommendation, definitely keep your foot on the gas on Google. Also, Gemini is increasing in market share, and while that's not translating yet to low funnel click-throughs, lots and lots of people are using Gemini, and it might become the dominant LLM over ChatGPT inside the next year or so. So I would definitely keep your foot on the gas on Google reviews. It's definitely the more easy to leverage platform. And then here's the thing to remember. Again, AI, only 1% of conversions, only about 0.5% of traffic. Low funnel activity is low here. So what's the more important thing? Getting your AI visibility in shape or getting your traditional visibility in shape? Well, traditional SEO visibility, local SEO visibility, that's mostly going to be centered around the Google ecosystem. So in terms of dividends paid on your efforts, your Google reviews are far more important for the foreseeable future. But unfortunately, Yelp is now coming into more focus. Claude, for its part, is looking broadly at consensus and is going to pull from all of the above. Again, Google, biggest volume. And so I would say your best bet is to focus there. So the takeaway here before we do any questions, and I have the team gave me 3 that I'll read and answer, and then anyone's welcome to drop any in the chat as well. Before we do, quick recap. So less than 1% of your current opportunity is coming from AI. And our study is showing that where it's within your control, which is unfortunately less than you might think, where it's within your control, your GEO, your generative engine optimization, is more about content and inventory and, of course, your reviews than any of the gimmicks that are being touted in rate sheets around the industry. It is not about having the latest, greatest schema markup, even if you can get it implemented, and we have. It doesn't end up being the lever that it's being touted as being. What you need is great quality content, and we'll expand upon that in future episodes. So without further ado, I'll keep an eye out to see if any of you ask any questions, but I'll read these off. What the team is doing is they're looking at our LinkedIn, and we're soliciting for questions after each one of these episodes. Feel free to jump into LinkedIn, drop me one, drop Wikimotive one, and we'll happily answer it on the spot, but we'll also bring it next time to help inform everybody. So the team curated these. I have not read them ahead of time so that we can answer them together, and they paraphrase them a little bit just to make it fit for everybody. So let's see. Last month, you said dealers should stop asking, how do I optimize for AEO, GEO, and start asking, how do I become the best answer? I did say that. What does the best answer actually look like for a dealership website? Great question. So this speaks to what I was just saying, which is levers and what will actually influence your visibility in AI. So the answer is content is the thing. Quality content is the thing that you have within your control. The way that I would describe it to everybody is start by thinking about what is Google's incentive for ranking better quality content at the top of traditional search. Okay. The answer is if you align the user with the best answer for their question, then they keep coming back to Google rather than defecting to Bing. And then they keep on clicking ads and Google makes money. Okay. So it behooves Google to provide the best answers to queries. Simple as that. And great quality content does exactly that. So why would LLMs be any different? They're in an arms race for market share and it's a bloodbath. And so it absolutely behooves ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, et cetera, to align the best content, the best answers as the cited options when somebody asks a question. So what's that going to be? It's going to be either the most inventory for an inventory search or content. Same as everything else in traditional search. So the fundamentals are you want to provide the best answer? Do the work. Do the work when you're generating content. You make a landing page for Ford dealer near Houston or Mazda dealer near Seattle. Hi, Melinda. And what you need to focus on is providing useful consumer advice inside of that page and making sure that it's low funnel, useful consumer advice, buy versus lease, different models in the lineup, new versus used, service, why buys for the store, brand voice. All of these things should be baked into high quality content. And this is the same as SEO fundamentals have always been, or at least in modern history. So you can't take shortcuts. And the caution I would give everybody is if you're using AI generated content for this, it's not that you can't, it's that it needs to have a very substantial amount of human expertise in the loop and human voice in the loop. You can't just say, ChatGPT, write me a landing page about XYZ and then like do a couple of iterations and call it a day. That will be way too lowest common denominator, and it will just be gray and boring compared to the store who chooses to put in the human work, written or planning, to be able to stand out above the rest. Okay. Melinda's question: Do you value a website page equal to a blog post for local SEO purposes? Great question. So blogs and pages have different purposes, and the answer would be I would value a blog page, a landing page, a website page higher than a blog post for the purpose of local SEO, with a caveat. That page needs to be focused on a low funnel phrase, a model for sale page, a dealer near wherever page, or keyword rather, I'm sorry. And that landing page needs to be high quality or it's not going to do the job. That having been said, assuming the landing page is those things, blogs only serve a supporting role. A blog on its own about CX5 trim levels is an informational blog. It's high funnel. People from all over the country will come to it. And the traffic that it produces will not generate conversions on a website. It's high funnel. If, however, you take that CX5 trim levels blog article, unique writing, high value, useful content, and you link it internally with a landing page, a high quality landing page written around Mazda CX5 for sale near Seattle, now the blog is serving a purpose to aid the landing page's visibility and authority. The two are working in concert. So if you have to pick one, you pick the page every single time. However, as you develop a more advanced long-term strategy, blog should enter the picture. Next question. You recommended improving weak, high-impact pages before creating more content. How should a dealer decide which existing pages are actually worth investing in? Okay, so the premise here would be that you have presently, from some past effort, pages that are important to the outcome, that would be high impact, but are currently weak in some way, as in they're not ranking or they're not doing their job. So therefore, we can assume they're weak. This actually goes pretty well to Melinda's question about pages versus blogs. So not all pages are created equal, right? You can have a landing page for Mazda CX-5 near Seattle, Mazda CX-5 for sale near Seattle, and it may not work. It may not be doing anything. Is that keyword really high value for a Mazda dealer near Seattle? Yes, very much so. Very important. However, if it doesn't have high enough quality content, if it was just a directions map and two paragraphs of information that don't tell anybody anything particularly useful, what ends up happening is weak performance because Google says you didn't really tell anybody anything useful. So what you need to do is you need to identify pages that exist on your website. And your vendor should be doing this. If anyone who's got a vendor who's doing SEO or GEO for your sites, and they're one and the same from the content perspective. Internally or your vendor, you need to be looking at your sitemap. You need to be looking at existing content. You need to be analyzing, do I have pieces of content here that are aimed at the right keywords? That happens all the time. Lots of vendors out there doing cookie cutter work are aiming at the right keywords. So the header on the page, the URL slug, it looks like a good keyword with the correct geography, but the content isn't doing its job. So if you have a landing page aligned to the right keyword, but the traffic and conversions are nil or the ranking is nil, then that means it's a weak page with high impact. Go rewrite it. Much, much better and a lot more human in the loop work, and that will create worthwhile results for your investment in time and money. Last, if AI visibility scores aren't a reliable measure of search performance, what would a useful AI search report from a dealer's agency or vendor actually show? Great question. Many of the people who are watching this right now have received an AI visibility score of some kind in your inbox. And you may have one right in front of you now, and you may be worried about it. And I'm here to tell you shouldn't be. We did cover this a couple episodes ago in a lot more detail. I believe it was the first episode. We actually went and did a live one and looked at what they look like and what the flaws are. So briefly, a recap. AI visibility scores, often produced by SEMrush, but there are some other platforms. It's a number. You get like, you have 30 out of 100 as your score. And you look at that and you're like, oh crap, we aren't showing up well. Vendors have sent this to you, or those of you in marketing roles, you may have had a GM or an owner send this to you because they're like, what the, and they want to know why you aren't showing up better, why your score isn't higher. Those scores are meaningless. And the reason they're meaningless is A, they are sampled nationally. You're a local business, not a national business. B, they're compared to competitors all over the country who might be dealers in different areas, but more so it's comparing you to Car and Driver, Motor Trend, the OEM, et cetera. And the worst part is it's loaded from a preformed catalog of prompts. There's hundreds of thousands of prompts, and you're being graded on things that are not relevant to your business, like at all. So you can't trust these scores whatsoever. If you're going to worry about your AI visibility, you need to have an SEMrush account, or your vendor does, and you need to load it with pre-curated prompts that are directly relevant to your business. Now, there is no search volume data available for AI at this point, so it's everyone's best guess, including ours, which things people are going to be saying, but you can get directionally accurate gauges by intuiting what would an important topic be that I would want to show up for. So if you're a Chevy dealer and you're in Houston, the prompt might be, find me Chevy Silverados under 50 grand near Houston. And by putting that prompt in and tracking, do you show up? Which of your competitors show up? Which third parties show up? You start to get a gauge for, are we there or not? And so what you do is you track a range of prompts that are specifically relevant. You have to track them individually. There's no score that creates. And this is the underpinning of the study that we've been doing long term. Okay. Another question from Melinda. I get so tired of hearing about model comparison pages for local SEO. I feel like these are too high funnel. If these are localized, for example, CX5 versus CRV, for hitting the ski slopes near Seattle, is that any better? Okay, so model pages and comparison pages, they are pretty high funnel. When someone just types in Mazda CX5 or even CX5 versus CRV, they are largely chasing information. Okay. And when they're looking for information, even if you get the click to your website, as you well know, Melinda, what ends up happening is you get the traffic. That's a nice vanity metric that makes you feel good in your analytics, but then there's no conversions. So what do? The answer is, first of all, comparisons can't really be localized in a big way. Okay. So your example of CX5 versus CRV for hitting the ski slopes near Seattle, not likely to really translate at the end of the day. Why? It just doesn't directly connect to a search term that you would want to show up for. Most people who are doing comparison searches, CRV versus CX5, they are too high funnel still for a dealership's resources to be spent on trying to capture that person in a low funnel sense. My recommendation would be take something like CX5 for sale, localize it. So you make a page about CX5 for sale near Seattle. The one ancillary thing that I'll mention about this is if you do high quality, uniquely written, human in the loop content for models and for comparisons, they can have SEO value that can impact your local lead driving visibility, but it's in a knock on effect kind of way. So if you have a great SEO base, you're doing all your transactional pages, and then you add to that unique model pages and unique comparison pages, the topical authority that you generate by having all of that additional content is valuable and does help propel the rest of your strategy. But it's difficult to get clean attribution on how that impact directly affects it, other than when you're someone like us and we've got 200 dealers to look at, and you say, well, this cohort of dealers doesn't have model pages, this cohort of dealers does have model pages, and well, look, the one that does is seeing faster results generation net over an 18-month window. We absolutely see that, but it's a bit of a leap of faith because it's very difficult to track the specific traffic on a model or comparison page to conversions. Brian asks, what are your thoughts about Horizon when it comes to creating content in-house? My answer would be Horizon is a great platform, as far as my understanding, for scaling generation and using AI as a force multiplier. Okay. My understanding is they are very well aware and telling their dealers that human in the loop is still critically necessary. So you still need to know what you're doing. And that can be you internally, that can be a vendor. The use of AI for content generation is not automatically a negative flag when it comes to Google or to LLMs, but Google, for their part, has specific guidelines against use of automation or AI-generated content. That is section 4.6.6 of the evaluator guidelines. Use of auto or AI generated content gets the lowest quality rating if it is not generating value for the end user. Value is generally derived from EEAT, expertise, experience, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, as defined by Google. And so what you have to do is, if you're going to use a platform like Horizon to be able to use force multiplication of AI on top of your human expertise, make sure that human expertise is well baked into everything that you're doing. You need to have research strategy, research competition, developed a thesis on how it is that you're going to use content to combat that. You're going to need to load your own brand voice in. You're going to need to do a lot of work. And one thing I don't know as of this point, either direction, and we intend to test it, is just with Horizon, I don't know what the capabilities are when it comes to low funnel landing pages, model and comparison pages, blog pages. I believe that's a strength of theirs in particular. And so I would say that you can't forget the fundamentals. And it's not about whether you're using force multiplication with something like Horizon or not. You cannot shortcut the human component of the EEAT that needs to be in your content. And you can't forget that the content that generates results is low funnel topics with a lot of humanity baked into the content somewhere. Okay. And Melinda, makes sense. Thank you. You're welcome. Very welcome. So if nobody else has any questions, I hope this was informative. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me. Remember, every month we're doing one of these. Keep an eye out for next one, and I will see you there. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or anywhere else in the meantime. Have a good one, guys.